Imagine standing at the edge of a moment and watching it slip not forward but in reverse. The laughter you just heard folding back into silence, as though the sound itself was being rewound. You could see your father grow younger and his father before him returning step by step to childhood, every wrinkle erased by the tide of time flowing the other way. Memories would not fade into the distance but rush back into you, each event collapsing neatly into its beginning, and the choices you made would unravel until they had never been made at all. It would be a world where the arrow of existence bent backward, where ashes reassembled into flame, and the familiar rhythm of life itself became a story told in reverse. Welcome to the Drowsy Astronaut. Here we drift deeper into the cosmos, while gently setting aside the troubles of your day, so you can relax or even fall asleep, while your subconscious wanders through the story of what it would mean for time to flow backward. So let's begin. Time feels to us like a river that moves without hesitation, and it carries each instant downstream without ever looping back, the ripples of our choices blending into the stream behind us. In ordinary life, we count on this, for meals are eaten then digested, for candles burn downward into stubs, and for greetings to lead into long conversations. But never do we see these stages reverse themselves. Our memories rely on this reliability, because only when change leaves an imprint can we recall what happened before. And that persistence becomes the evidence of lived experience. Even the clocks on our walls or glowing softly on our screens remind us of this one-way pattern, a human attempt to mark the endless drift of seconds in their irreversible path. Still, physics does not swear loyalty to the same direction we feel, for its rules are crafted with a symmetry that seems indifferent, the deep structure of nature allowing forward or backward equally. The mathematics of motion, whether describing a ball rolling across the floor or a planet orbiting the sun, will solve just as well if all events are played in reverse, suggesting that the direction of time is not carved into the rules themselves, but perhaps into the way reality unfolded. When Einstein wrote of space-time as a fabric with 4 coordinates, he made no claim that one of them must always progress in the same direction, only that we measure it that way in practice. This symmetry raises unsettling questions, because if the rules allow reversal, why then do we not observe it? And why does our universe feel so devoted to one-way motion? Entropy becomes the key word here, the measure of disorder that grows whenever systems evolve, and it has become our guiding explanation for the arrow of time, whispering that it is not physics alone, but probability that insists on forward drift. Imagine a cup full of water knocked to the floor, its contents scattering, its fragments spreading. The countless ways disorder can unfold compared to the vanishingly rare ways they could leap back into order. The odds of reverse time are not zero, yet they are so incredibly small that for all practical existence they never arrive, making the forward path overwhelmingly likely. We accept this as a law of our everyday world, that disorder grows and memory points forward, but beneath it all the physics still permits another path that the dice never roll. Consider the difference between the single neat arrangement of puzzle pieces fitting together and the near infinite number of ways those pieces could be scattered. One state is rare, the other common beyond measure. This is why order feels temporary, fragile in comparison to disorder, because a small nudge can destroy it, but endless accidents are required to restore it. So in practice, we only ever see one direction dominate. The arrow of time is therefore written not in the deep equations themselves, but in the balance of probability that comes from large numbers of particles, from the way chance plays out when trillions of interactions are tallied. So when we say the future lies ahead, What we truly mean is that entropy will almost certainly increase, and that the book of reality will continue to add pages, but never unwrite them. Yet, imagining a reversed time invites us into strange territory, where cause and effect would blur, and where memory might not mean what it does to us now. For remembering tomorrow instead of yesterday is a puzzle almost beyond words. The experience of such a life would be baffling, because a person would watch their dinner reassemble on a plate, with chewed fragments forming into food, with hunger rising as energy is drawn from their body back into order. And even conversations would seem to end before they began. Our stories could not be told in the same way, since they rely on suspense and unfolding. But in a reversed stream, the surprise ending would come first, and every plot would only unravel toward a forgotten introduction. It would feel less like living and more like unspooling, like a film played in rewind, where laughter is inhaled, tears return to eyes, and the world slowly builds toward a birth rather than an end. Perhaps one way to grasp it is to imagine a familiar morning scene in reverse, where coffee rises back into its pot, where steam condenses, and where toothpaste flows upward into its tube, each act showing how strange normality would appear if time's river turned. The comfort of routine would vanish because predictability is rooted in forward steps, and without it, the very notion of expectation collapses. How could we plan dinner if hunger arrives after eating, or arrange meetings if goodbyes always precede hellos? Our language itself would falter, built as it is upon verbs pointing forward, upon cause following cause, and we would need new grammar to describe events unfolding in reverse. Even our sense of identity might warp, because who we are depends on a trail of memories that stack one upon another. But in reverse time, that stack would dismantle itself until nothing remained. Still, the imagination strains, because even when we picture events backward, we remain observers bound to forward thought. Our brains cannot truly escape the arrow they were shaped by. A memory of tomorrow is impossible for us to hold, because the physical changes in neurons record the past, and those marks cannot be undone at will. They are entropic traces that cannot erase themselves to create reverse recollection. Thus, the question of time reversal pushes beyond science into philosophy, forcing us to ask not only what is possible in equations, but what is possible to perceive, whether a being bound to entropy could ever survive awareness of reversed flow. For the laws allow it, but our biology may not, making us creatures of one direction even if the cosmos itself remains impartial. Physicists often describe this puzzle as the tension between micro and macro, because at the microscopic level the laws run both ways, yet at the macroscopic level entropy wins. So the tiny and the vast tell different stories. Each particle moves under rules that care nothing for time's arrow. They can bounce backward or forward in a simulation with no contradiction, yet gather billions together, and their collective patterns almost always lean toward more disorder. This contrast between the reversible micro and irreversible macro is what makes the arrow of time so fascinating. We live in the sum of countless tiny events that, together, tip the scales toward forward motion. So while the atoms in your body obey impartial laws, the life they build obeys an arrow. A universe where you wake, you grow, you age, and you end. Always ahead, not behind. Still, if the equations are indifferent, some theorists ask if there could exist regions of the cosmos where time runs the other way, where entropy decreases instead of increases. A pocket of reversed time might look impossible to us, but in a vast universe, perhaps probabilities permit rare fluctuations, regions where disorder shrinks rather than grows. tiny islands of reversal inside the sea of forward drift. If such a domain existed, what would it feel like to enter? Would a traveller from our arrow simply see bizarre events? Or would their own body and memory begin to unravel in sync with that place? These questions remain open because no observation has ever shown us such a region. But the very possibility reminds us how much of physics still whispers beyond reach. Imagine walking into such a reversed region where the air cools not by losing heat but by regaining it, where spilled water gathers itself from the floor back into a glass, and where every sound is heard before the vibration that creates it. The logic of cause and effect would crumble, because you could not strike a match without first seeing the flame vanish. You could not speak without first hearing your words pulled back into silence, and every action would unravel into its preparation. Our intuition resists such visions, for we are trained from birth to trust that effects follow causes. And yet, if time reversed, what we call intuition would itself reverse. It is possible that a mind born in such a place would see nothing strange at all, just as we see nothing strange about forward drift, because expectation is only ever shaped by what is normal in one's universe. Some physicists even wonder whether the Big Bang might have seeded two time arrows, one moving forward, as we know, the other backward into a mirror cosmos, both born from the same singular beginning. This theory suggests that entropy increased on both sides of the origin, but in opposite directions, so that another universe may exist with its arrow pointing toward what we would call our past, an unimaginable twin unfolding in symmetry. The beauty of such a possibility is that it restores balance to the equations, making the cosmos less lopsided, less special in its preference, and giving entropy a chance to spread out in both directions of time. If true, then our history is only half the story, for beyond the Big Bang's veil, there could be a civilization that calls our earliest moments their farthest future, and their yesterday is our tomorrow. Even if such symmetry exists, we cannot communicate with that mirror, for the barrier of time itself blocks the bridge, and our signals would unmake themselves before crossing. A message sent backward would unravel into static, every photon reversing before it reached its destination, so no correspondence can link one arrow to another. In that sense, we remain alone, each universe bound to its own entropy, like two books printed back to back that can never be read across, pages filling one way here and the opposite there. This separation might explain why the equations remain free of bias while our world feels one-sided, the hidden half living its life in silence, unknowable yet consistent. Yet, even without distant mirror worlds, there are ways in which tiny experiments flirt with time reversal, hinting at cracks in the arrow's dominance, cracks we can glimpse though never fully cross. In quantum physics, particles sometimes appear to explore paths both forward and backward, their probabilities interfering like overlapping waves. And in this strange regime, the arrow seems less strict. Some interpretations even describe antiparticles, like positrons, as electrons moving backward in time, a poetic but mathematically consistent way of viewing their behavior. If this perspective is true, then even in our forward arrow world, little sparks of reverse time motion flicker beneath the surface, ghostly reminders of symmetry playing out in miniature. Still, the large-scale arrow always overwhelms these subtleties because macroscopic systems are built from staggering numbers of particles, and together they drown out the reversibility of each component. Your coffee does not leap back into its cup, even though every molecule could in principle trace its steps, because the odds are too overwhelming, and thus the whole drink grows cold rather than reheated by chance. The probability of all molecules conspiring to move backward at once is so absurdly tiny that it may never happen once across the lifetime of the cosmos. So the arrow feels like law, even though it is only likelihood. We learn from this that inevitability is sometimes just overwhelming odds, and that what we call laws may simply be rules written by probability, the dice of physics weighted so heavily toward one outcome that it becomes our only reality. Think of a shuffled deck of cards. There is only one arrangement that is perfect order, but countless messy shuffles, and so the game of chance almost never returns you to the starting layout. That deck is our universe, and time is the shuffle, scattering possibilities into disorder until the rarest alignments are gone forever. And entropy becomes the story written by the spread. To reverse time would be like watching every shuffle return the cards to their box in neat order, something possible but almost unimaginable in practice. And this shows us why the forward arrow rules. Thus, the truth is not that time cannot go backward, but that it almost never does, and that the difference between impossible and improbable is the gap between laws of nature and luck. Still, we find beauty in this fragility because our lives themselves depend on the arrow, on growth rather than regression, on memory rather than unmemory, and on the comfort of knowing tomorrow will not be yesterday. The aging of our bodies, while bittersweet, is a direct gift of entropy, a sign that time moves in one reliable direction, and that each stage of life follows another with certainty. Without this direction, we could never tell stories, never build meaning, never recognize cause or consequence, for all of culture depends on the one-way street. So in a quiet way we may thank entropy even as it ages us, even as it wears down the stars, for it allows us to live in a world that makes sense. Still, questions linger, because if the laws are symmetrical, why did the universe begin in such low entropy, a state of incredible order that allowed the arrow to exist? Why did the dice roll this way at all? The mystery of that initial condition haunts cosmology, for we cannot explain why the Big Bang was so improbably neat, why it started in a condition so rare, only that it did. From that beginning, every arrow was set, every future determined to unfold into more disorder. So perhaps our entire sense of time depends on a single cosmic accident. If this accident had been different, if the universe began in chaos rather than order, maybe no arrow would exist, and no beings like us would ever arise to ask the question. Perhaps this is the true meaning of time's arrow, not a fundamental law, but a fragile story born from a rare beginning, a story we live inside but do not fully understand. The universe itself does not demand direction, yet the improbable initial order forced direction into being, and we are its beneficiaries, swimming downstream because that is where the current points. In that sense, our entire existence is a ripple on the surface of entropy, a temporary structure maintained by the flow, fragile but luminous for as long as it lasts. So when we say the past is behind us and the future ahead, we are simply repeating the legacy of that first improbable state, carrying its arrow through every heartbeat, every breath, every star. Let's drift quietly now into deeper waters, considering not just the arrow but its consequences for the grand scale of the cosmos. For stars, galaxies, and black holes all live under entropy's rule. A star burns because fusion moves from order to disorder, from concentrated hydrogen to scattered heavier elements, and its light exists only because the arrow points forward. The death of a star is therefore not just an astrophysical fact, but a direct outcome of time's irreversibility, for energy is released until no more can be squeezed from its fuel. Even the ashes of stars, the carbon, oxygen, iron, are signs of the arrow, because only in moving forward could they be forged and spread. Entropy guides galaxies as well. for they form from clouds collapsing under gravity, a strange process that increases overall disorder even while creating ordered shapes. And this paradox is resolved only when we see the full picture. The clumping of matter into stars seems like order, but the radiation and heat released into space more than offset that order, driving entropy higher, and thus even beauty is bought by the arrow. When black holes form, swallowing matter into silence, they too carry entropy with them, storing it on their horizons like cosmic notebooks, records that may never be erased. In fact, black hole entropy is the largest of all, proportional to their surface area, suggesting that the universe's arrow leans hardest where gravity reigns strongest, and that time's deepest secrets may lie hidden at their edges. Here, the arrow of time becomes inseparable from the fate of the cosmos, for as entropy grows, stars fade, galaxies quiet, and energy spreads thin, leading one day to heat death where nothing changes at all. The future of the universe may be this ultimate stillness, a frozen silence where every process has run its course, and the arrow then reaches its final endpoint. In such a state, time itself may lose meaning, because without change, there is nothing to mark before and after, nothing to distinguish cause from consequence. It is possible that this is the true end of time, not a reversal, but an exhaustion, the arrow running forward until it can run no more. Yet, within this grim vision lies wonder, because it tells us we live in the rare middle chapter where stars still burn, where galaxies still collide, where entropy is still climbing, and we are witnesses to the climb. The present moment of the universe is therefore extraordinary, balanced between improbable beginnings and inevitable endings, a window in which complexity and life can briefly thrive. This balance is delicate, for too much entropy and life cannot form, too little and time has not yet found its direction. But here we are, poised within the narrow band. Think of where we left ourselves, drifting with the idea of entropy as the guide that fixes the arrow of time, and realizing that our very existence is possible only because this flow holds steady, for the universe leans always toward one direction. The truth is that if time did run backward, the universe as we know it would look profoundly alien. Not merely a familiar film played in reverse, but a rearrangement of cause, memory, and meaning, reshaping every pattern of life. We see evidence for the forward arrow in every star, in every decaying atom, in every process that takes energy from high to low. But the backward path is something we can only imagine, a shadow permitted by mathematics, though barred by probability. And yet the possibility remains hidden within the laws, whispering that the universe itself does not forbid reversal. Only that the odds weigh so heavily against it, we are trapped in the forward story, unable to glimpse the other. Let's examine how this puzzle unfolds across layers of reality, from the tiniest particles to the grandest cosmic structures. For the arrow's strength does not come from rules alone, but from scale itself, magnified into certainty. At the atomic level, the rules remain reversible, describing collisions that can be solved forward or backward. And the mathematics shows no loyalty, for symmetry underlies every calculation, making direction irrelevant at this stage. But when billions of collisions accumulate, the tide shifts, for the likelihood of disorder increases dramatically. And from the sheer counting of arrangements, probability writes its script until direction feels carved in stone, though it is only statistics. So the arrow of time is not commanded by law but born from number, emerging from the averaging of endless outcomes. And in that emergence, the irreversible future unfolds, step by step, as though inevitable. Consider, A simple example of melting ice. Molecules break from rigid bonds and slide into restless motion. Disorder grows, and we interpret this as times advance, for our senses know no other meaning, though the molecules themselves are blind. The structure of ice, with its neat lattice of alignment, is rare in probability space, while the jumble of liquid water is vastly more common, and thus the arrow points toward melting, making the return to frozen order nearly invisible in chance. In principle, nothing prevents the molecules from regrouping, snapping back into perfect order, but the odds are staggeringly small, so small they may not occur in the lifetime of the universe, and the forward arrow becomes all we witness. This is how the arrow reveals itself, not as impossibility, but as weight of likelihood, a tilt so strong it feels like law, carried by chance until it appears unbreakable, though the equations remain open to either way. Still, our curiosity digs deeper, for probability is not enough to satisfy the human need to know origins, and we ask why the arrow was permitted in the first place, why entropy began so low, and why disorder had room to grow. The early universe, just after the Big Bang, was astonishingly smooth, a canvas stretched evenly, with matter and energy spread so uniformly, and this smoothness created the conditions for entropy's rise, giving time its direction, shaping everything that followed. If the beginning had been chaotic, filled with tangled irregularities and maximum disorder, then the arrow could never have appeared, for there would be no ladder for entropy to climb, no increase left to unfold, and no history to record. So the mystery becomes not why time flows forward, but why the universe began in such rare order. And this question remains unsolved, haunting cosmologists. An enigma hidden in the first instant. Some argue that the Big Bang was a statistical fluke, an improbable roll that began with extraordinary smoothness, and from this accident flowed the arrow of time, stretching toward us, carried by entropy's steady growth. Others imagine the multiverse, a collection of countless beginnings, each with different arrows, some perhaps reversed, and we exist simply because our branch allowed complexity, energy, and life. The challenge is that no telescope can peer beyond our cosmic horizon, and so these stories remain mathematics more than evidence, sketches of possibility that inspire but do not confirm, leaving us in wonder. Still, such ideas remind us that time's arrow is not carved in granite, but sculpted by initial conditions, fragile at its birth, yet strong enough to govern galaxies, and to dictate the very rhythm of existence. Imagine then a universe with its arrow reversed, a mirror to ours where entropy decreases instead of rising, and every star burns backward, growing more ordered as time passes, while beings live with memories of what we call tomorrow. In such a cosmos, no one would notice the strangeness, for their sense of cause and memory would follow their arrow naturally, and to them, our direction would appear as alien as theirs does to us, both convinced they live the only truth. We wonder if such universes could meet, but the barrier of entropy forbids it, for any signal crossing would dissolve before arrival, reversed into silence, leaving the two halves forever isolated. Perhaps the universe itself is two-sided, forward and backward at once, but our vision is locked to one half, and the other remains unseen, a hidden mirror of our own story. Back here, we can test the arrow in experiments, probing its limits, searching for cracks, to see whether reversal can ever be glimpsed, even for a moment, even at the smallest scales. In quantum mechanics, particles act as waves of probability, and their mathematics allows time symmetry in both directions, showing that beneath our macroscopic world, reversibility remains, alive but fragile. A famous example is the positron, which can be described as an electron moving backward in time. And though this is a perspective rather than an observation, it captures the strange neutrality of the equations, where the arrow does not matter. Such descriptions do not mean that coffee unspills or plates unshatter, but they remind us that at the foundation, the rules care nothing for forward or backward, leaving the arrow to emerge only in scale. Even radioactive decay, one of nature's most faithful clocks, reveals the arrow in action. For once a nucleus decays, it never reverses, and the ticking of half-lives writes time into matter itself, permanent and one-way. The half-life of uranium, stretching for billions of years, is evidence that matter itself ages, that the arrow does not only govern stars and galaxies, but the very atoms in our hands, making time tangible. Yet the mechanism remains probabilistic, for decay is not deterministic but statistical, and the equations themselves still permit reversibility. Only the outcomes lean forward, weighted by overwhelming odds. So we learn again that the arrow we trust is not law carved in stone, but chance written at cosmic scale, repeated until probability feels absolute, until it becomes our reality. Still, the human imagination strains against statistics, for we hunger for meaning in the arrow, and we ask what it gives us beyond inevitability, beyond probability, what role it plays in our stories. In literature and culture, time reversal has always fascinated, from myths of seers glimpsing tomorrow to tales of rewound fates, each playing with the wish that endings might be undone, that loss could reverse, that entropy could be cheated. But the paradox is that every story must still be told forward, for even in imagining reversal, our words follow the arrow we know. Our logic cannot escape the stream, and so we narrate reversal as though it were forward, bound even in rebellion. This limitation shows how deep the arrow runs, not just in physics but in thought, shaping the way we speak, the way we dream, the way we grieve, making forwardness the fabric of culture. Perhaps the clearest philosophical challenge is Loschmidt's paradox, which asked why entropy rises if the laws are reversible, and his question still echoes, pointing to the strange divide between micro and macro, between symmetry and arrow. Loschmidt noted that the motion of atoms can be reversed without contradiction. So why then does disorder grow? Why does time point forward at all, if every trajectory could be traced backward as well? The answer came from Boltzmann and statistical mechanics, which showed that while reversals are possible, they are overwhelmingly unlikely, and probability explains the arrow we see. Probability builds the future, with chance disguised as law. Yet the insight left another riddle, for it depends on the beginning being low in entropy, and why the cosmos began so improbably ordered remains unsolved, a mystery that physics still carries forward. Beyond equations, think of human experience if time reversed and the strangeness grows unbearable. For memory, identity, and purpose all rely on the forward arrow, and without it, our lives would collapse. If the brain remembered tomorrow instead of yesterday, continuity would vanish. Our sense of self would unravel, for we define who we are by what has already happened, not by what has yet to come. In a reversed world, forgetting would happen as soon as events arrived, every moment slipping away into nothing, every story dissolving as it began, leaving no foundation for learning or meaning. Thus, the arrow of time is not only physical but psychological. It binds thought to sequence, it chains memory to order, it shapes what it means to be alive. Still, science admits that rare fluctuations could bend the arrow, for probability allows that entropy may decrease locally for a moment, though on human scales it may never occur, the chance too thin, the odds too steep. The theory of statistical mechanics predicts that in infinite time, improbable events must occur, and in that sense, reversal is guaranteed, though only after spans so vast they defy imagination. Waiting in silence. Some scientists take this to mean the universe may be larger than we dream, perhaps infinite, where rare reversals do exist. Bubbles where time bends, where disorder shrinks, where an arrow runs backward. So perhaps the arrow is not eternal, not absolute, but a property of here and now, a temporary story we live within, fragile yet certain while it lasts. Let's bring the scale back to stars and galaxies, where entropy writes history as surely as ink writes words, for their fates too are chained to direction, their cycles bound to the arrow, irreversible at every step. Every star consumes fuel, fusing atoms into heavier elements, releasing light as order gives way to disorder, and in that burning the arrow reveals itself, writing each phase of stellar life, until fuel is gone. The sequence of stellar evolution is one way. No star unburns its hydrogen, no supernova unexplodes. Each step moves forward, leaving ashes behind, leaving heavier elements scattered, impossible to reverse. Even galaxies follow this story, colliding, merging, and settling into stillness. Each act raising entropy, each change writing another page of cosmic aging, each turn pointing only forward. Even life depends entirely on this imbalance, for biology feeds on energy flowing from high to low, sunlight pouring to earth, plants absorbing and passing it onward, creatures living on its direction. Without the sun radiating steadily into the dark, no cycles would continue, for metabolism itself depends on imbalance. An equilibrium would kill motion, silence chemistry, and end all growth. So, the biology of every creature, every heartbeat, every breath, is entropy translated into order for a short time, survival carved from the arrow, life drawn from imbalance, existence as a temporary defiance. This is why the dream of reversal undoes us, for it would collapse the very process of being alive, taking away not just history but function, not just story but breath, dismantling the fragile flow of life. Perhaps this is why reversal fascinates, for it is not only scientific curiosity but human longing, a wish that endings could be undone, that loss could return, that grief could soften, if only time bent. In grief, the heart aches for time to rewind, to step back into moments before absence, before endings. But entropy forbids it, forbids every return, and forces us onward. The truth is harsh but also beautiful, for because moments vanish, they gain value. Because they cannot be replayed, they shine brighter, and the arrow turns fragility into meaning. So we cherish the flow even as it pains us, for without it there would be no growth, no memory, no love. And the forward arrow becomes not just physics, but poetry, the story of living itself. Now that we have lingered on the origins of the arrow, let us turn our gaze outward to the cosmos where time sculpts the fates of stars, for their entire life cycles are monuments to entropy, moving forward without pause, bound to irreversible burning. A star begins in a cradle of gas, where gravity squeezes hydrogen atoms together, and fusion ignites, pouring light and heat outward, spreading disorder into space, while creating balance within. The lifetime of such a star is defined by this imbalance, for as long as fuel remains, it glows, feeding on order and releasing disorder. But the moment fuel runs out, no reversal can rescue it, and collapse begins. Every supernova, Every white dwarf, every black hole is a chapter in this irreversible script. Each stage a step forward, each stage locked in entropy's grasp, showing us the arrow written in fire. Imagine a world where this process ran backward, where dead stars revived themselves with perfect order restored, supernova remnants gathering their scattered atoms, fusing them back into lighter fuel, until the star was reborn. Such a cosmos would feel uncanny because light would not stream outward but collapse inward, carrying heat and radiation into shrinking cores, making the universe darker with every passing age, brighter only at the beginning. The balance of galaxies would invert, with order rising and chaos shrinking, and life as we know it would be unsustainable, for biology depends on flows of energy spilling outward, not inward towards silence. So a reversed universe would likely be lifeless, stripped of the imbalance that nourishes stars and organisms alike. A vast stillness where time erases complexity instead of growing it, a mirror world of absence. Even in our forward-flowing universe, stars leave behind entropy's signatures, their ashes scattered across galaxies, building blocks for planets and life itself. The arrow etched into every element of our bodies, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the oxygen you breathe, all were born in stellar furnaces, forged as entropy advanced, distributed when stars died. And none of it can be unwound. We carry the evidence of time's arrow within us, every atom a relic of irreversible events. And the story of life is bound inseparably to the story of stellar death, with no chance of reversal. So the truth is that without entropy, there would be no stars, no planets, no life. The arrow is not only a destroyer, but also a creator, shaping existence itself, in ways both harsh and generous. Consider now the galaxies themselves, swarming collections of billions of stars, shaped by gravity and motion, colliding across eons, merging into new forms, never undoing what was done, their very existence testimony to forward time. A collision between galaxies cannot unhappen. For once, their stars and gas intermix, no law of chance can unscramble them, and the outcome becomes permanent, a new system born, irreversible in every respect. This process raises entropy even as it creates beauty, for while spiral arms or bright cores emerge, the heat and radiation expelled ensure that disorder rises, and the arrow continues its march, inscribed across cosmic architecture. So the galaxies we see through telescopes are frozen records of entropy's climb, their shapes carved by irreversible meetings, their light stretched by expanding space, each one a monument to the arrow. Still, deeper lies the question of black holes, regions where time itself seems distorted beyond recognition, where entropy reaches an extreme and the arrow's meaning twists, challenging even our definitions. A black hole forms when collapse overwhelms all resistance, compressing matter to a singularity, hiding it behind an event horizon. And at that horizon, information seems trapped forever, unrecoverable, lost to us in principle. The paradox of black holes is that they carry entropy unlike anything else, proportional not to their volume, but their surface, making them the universe's most efficient storage of disorder, vast ledgers of irreversible events. To reverse a black hole would mean uncollapsing matter, pulling information back across horizons. But such reversal defies every calculation, defies every probability, remaining a vision only of imagination. Perhaps the strangest twist is Hawking radiation, which shows that black holes slowly evaporate, leaking energy outward, turning their mass into faint whispers of particles, spreading entropy even further, until nothing remains. This process confirms again that even the most mysterious objects follow the arrow, for they do not regain mass but lose it, dissolving into disorder, unable to restore what was swallowed, until evaporation ends them. The truth here is sobering, for even black holes, symbols of permanence, cannot escape time. Entropy rules them as it rules us, marking their future with inevitable loss, stretching towards silence. Thus, the cosmos itself is a vast stage of entropy's performance. Stars burning, galaxies merging, black holes evaporating, every act leaning forward, every act beyond reversal. Now, imagine the ultimate consequence: heat death, the state where entropy has reached its maximum and no useful energy remains. The stars extinguished, galaxies dark, black holes evaporated, and the arrow halts in exhaustion. In this future, no processes unfold, for without gradients there is no flow, no change, and without change there is no time, no before or after, only stillness stretching forever. Such a universe would be a graveyard of possibility, a cosmos emptied of story, where entropy has finished its climb, and with it time's arrow ends, leaving silence instead of motion. It is possible that this is our final destiny, not reversal, but stasis, not cycles reborn, but processes spent, not arrows turned, but arrows broken, a conclusion written from the first beginning. Yet, within this grim picture lies wonder, for we are alive in the rare middle chapters, when stars still burn, galaxies still shine, and entropy still has room to grow, a brief age of possibility. The present is extraordinary, balanced between improbable beginnings and inevitable endings, allowing life to arise and consciousness to wonder, to ask questions about time, to imagine reversal even when it is denied. This window is fragile, for it will not last forever, but within it complexity blooms, order forms, stories unfold, and the arrow, instead of silencing, creates, gifting us moments that matter. So we cherish the time we inhabit, because it is temporary, because it is rare, because entropy's climb both threatens and enables us, writing beauty even as it guarantees loss. Consider again the human scale, where our lives echo the arrow in miniature. For birth, growth, aging, and death are sequences bound to forward time, and no reversal can alter them. The cells of our bodies follow entropy, breaking down, misfiring, wearing out, and though medicine may slow the process, no cure for the arrow exists, for disorder always wins. In principle, reversing the arrow would mean restoring youth, rebuilding cells, erasing scars. But this is not permitted, not even in imagination without paradox, because memory itself would unravel with every step. So we age not as punishment, but as consequence, as reflection of cosmic law, each wrinkle and moment another proof of entropy's power, another step that cannot be retraced. Even memory itself is bound to this arrow, for the brain records events through physical changes, leaving marks that point only forward, and those marks cannot erase themselves into recollections of tomorrow, for they rely on irreversible traces. The neuron strengthens its connections when we learn, adjusting chemically and electrically, and this process itself increases entropy, leaving behind irreversible modifications that accumulate with time, making memory possible. To reverse memory would mean undoing these changes, unmarking the traces of yesterday, but that act would erase identity, erase story, erase continuity, until no self remained. Thus our minds are creatures of the arrow, dependent on forward sequence to survive. unable to imagine truly what it would mean to live backward, chained to one direction of thought. Still, physics invites speculation, and some theories suggest time reversal may not be entirely foreign, for quantum processes hint at paths running both ways, at probabilities exploring all options, forward and backward at once. The interpretations of quantum mechanics allow such visions, though they remain abstract, mathematical, not observable, and they challenge our sense of reality by refusing to honor the arrow, by blurring cause and effect. In practice, we cannot harness this, for macroscopic systems drown out the subtleties, and the arrow reasserts itself, sweeping away the delicate reversibility of quanta, leaving us trapped in forward time. But the questions remain, tantalizing and unsolved, whispering that beneath the surface of certainty lies symmetry, and perhaps hidden possibilities we cannot touch. Perhaps, then the fascination with backward time is not only curiosity, but longing, for to imagine reversal is to imagine control, a chance to undo mistakes, to retrieve what has been lost, to challenge mortality itself. In dreams, we sometimes feel this, replaying moments as though time bent, revisiting scenes with changes made. But even dreams cannot truly reverse, they only reorder forward memory, bound still to entropy. The truth is that we are creatures of the arrow, unable to rebel, unable to break the chain, and yet the very fact that we can imagine rebellion gives us a strange freedom, for imagination is forward's gift. So we continue to wonder, crafting stories, equations, and myths of reversal, even though the arrow holds us tight, even though entropy forbids escape, because wondering itself is a way of living within time. Every arrow begins with a cause, and every cause flows into an effect. Yet the question of why this direction exists remains one of the most haunting puzzles in science, a riddle that stretches beyond equations. The laws of physics do not demand it, for they are neutral and symmetrical, blind to forward or backward. But our lived reality insists on the one-way path, an insistence that feels absolute, unshakable in experience. We know entropy is the clue, the slow climb of disorder through the universe, yet even this answer leads to another question. Why was the universe born so improbably ordered? Why did the story begin with such fragile neatness when chaos was far more likely? So the mystery deepens, and with it our search moves forward, not only across physics, but across philosophy. For we must ask not just how time flows, but why it began to flow at all, and why it flows this way. Perhaps the first step is to imagine entropy not as an enemy, but as a storyteller. For every rise in disorder writes a chapter, shaping events in a sequence we can follow, transforming the abstract into narrative. A memory is possible only because entropy grows, because changes leave traces that cannot be undone. And without those traces, there would be no continuity, no story to tell, no sense of past or future. So in truth, the arrow is not just about thermodynamics, but about meaning, for without it, existence would be static, without plot, without identity, a still photograph instead of a flowing river. The question of backward time, therefore, is not only whether it could exist, but whether it could be lived. For if memory and cause collapsed, life itself would lose coherence, dissolving into fragments. Still, physics tempts us with visions, with hints that symmetry hides beneath the arrow, and that reversibility may be woven into the fabric of the cosmos, even if it is invisible to us, even if it cannot be reached. At the microscopic level, the rules remain even-handed, and a movie of two atoms colliding could run in either direction without contradiction, making it impossible to tell forward from backward, at least in isolation. But when we scale upward, Probability takes over, and disorder swallows order almost without exception. And here the arrow emerges, turning neutrality into direction and uncertainty into certainty. So the truth, we find, is layered, a cosmos symmetrical in its base but directional in its whole, a system where the rules permit both ways, but the numbers nearly always prefer one until preference feels absolute. Consider then how fragile our existence is within this tide, balanced on the difference between improbable order and inevitable disorder, a balance that makes life possible even as it ensures its eventual end. The sun itself is a machine of entropy, burning fuel to radiate energy outward, feeding every process on Earth. And if it were reversed, if energy flowed inward, nothing could survive. No biology could persist. So the arrow is not simply a curiosity of physics, but the foundation of life, the reason plants grow, animals breathe, and humans think. For without imbalance, nothing would move, nothing would live, nothing would change. In this sense, the question of reversal is more than hypothetical, it is existential. For to undo the arrow is to undo life itself, to erase the very conditions that allow meaning, leaving emptiness instead of story. Yet we can imagine, because imagination is one freedom entropy cannot take from us, and so we picture what it would mean if the tide reversed, if order increased and disorder faded, if time ran the other way. In such a world, broken cups would leap together, ashes would reform into logs, heat would gather into flames, and every moment would appear miraculous to our forward-trained eyes, though ordinary to those who lived it. The future would feel like memory, and the past like mystery. Identity would collapse into confusion, for who we are depends on the trail of irreversible marks we call experience, and without them the self would vanish. So to live in reversed time would not be life as we know it, but something alien, a kind of existence without coherence, without narrative, without the anchors that give us purpose. More dream than reality. Still, there are deeper layers to explore, for even our universe may not be the only story, and some cosmologists suggest that time's arrow may split at the Big Bang, one arrow flowing forward as we know, the other backward into a mirror cosmos, invisible but real. This theory paints the origin as a double fountain, spraying entropy outward in both directions, making two universes that see themselves as forward, yet appear reversed from the other's view, balanced in symmetry. If such a mirror cosmos exists, it is forever cut off from us, because communication cannot cross the divide. Signals would dissolve into nonsense, undone before they arrived, making the separation eternal. But the possibility itself is powerful, for it shows that our arrow may not be unique. That symmetry is preserved at the highest level, even if locally we only see half, living our lives on one side of the divide. Perhaps, then the arrow is both absolute and relative, absolute within our world, relative across the multiverse, absolute in experience, relative in theory, both true depending on perspective. To the atoms that make up our bodies, there is no preference, only rules applied equally forward and back. But to the body as a whole, to the life those atoms sustain, the arrow is unavoidable, a law that feels eternal. This duality defines our search for answers. Time is reversible in principle, irreversible in practice, free in the equations, fixed in the cosmos, neutral in rules, directional in outcome. And so the answer we reach is layered, a truth that resists simplification, a truth that says time could run backward, but probability ensures it almost never does, and thus our story runs forward. Still, the arrow's role in human meaning cannot be dismissed, for it gives weight to moments, value to choices, because without direction, nothing would matter, nothing would endure, nothing would count. The memory of love, of loss, of learning, gains its force because it cannot be rewound, because the moment is unrepeatable, because entropy forbids return, and this finality gives significance. If the arrow could bend freely, life would lose sharpness, for nothing would be final, and meaning would dissolve, as every action could be undone, every moment repeated, stripping away weight. So in a quiet way, we depend on the arrow not only for physics, but for purpose, for it is the forward flow that grants meaning to our existence, making fleetingness into value. Now let us move even further outward, to the fate of the universe itself, where the arrow points not only to change, but to destiny. A destiny written in the rising tide of entropy, pushing towards silence, pulling every star with it. The galaxies we see today will not remain, for they collide, merge, and fade, their structures dissolving into new forms, their light stretched and thinned by expanding space, their histories written irreversibly, never to return. Black holes, once thought eternal, evaporate slowly, releasing faint radiation until their mass is gone. And with them the entropy they carried is spread further, pushing the cosmos toward uniformity, toward the final balance. And in the end, the universe will reach heat death, a state of maximum disorder where no gradients remain. And without gradients, there can be no flow, no story, no arrow, only stillness unbroken forever. Yet, in contemplating that final stillness, we find a strange peace, for it reminds us that we live in the rare Middle Age, when stars still shine, when galaxies still form, when the arrow still writes history. The present moment is a fragile balance, perched between improbable beginnings and inevitable endings. And in that balance, complexity blooms, life emerges, consciousness wanders, and stories are told. This window is narrow, but within it the arrow creates not only entropy, but beauty. For it is the climb of disorder that allows the rise of complexity, the spark of life, the birth of thought, against the odds. So when we reflect on what it means for time to run backward, we also discover the miracle of it running forward. For only in forward time could meaning arise at all. Only in forward time could we ask the question. Still, one last puzzle lingers. Why do we feel time so strongly? Why does its flow press on our minds with such weight, when the laws beneath care so little, when symmetry still reigns below, when direction is only probability? Some scientists argue that consciousness itself is the reason, that minds evolved to experience the arrow as certainty, because memory and planning require forward marks, require irreversible traces, and so life feels time as absolute. In this sense, the arrow may be as much a property of awareness as of physics, for without beings to notice, entropy would still rise, but it would not be experienced, not felt, not lived. So we carry time within us as much as it carries us, our memories shaping the arrow as surely as entropy shapes our lives. Entwined in a loop where meaning and physics meet, inseparable forever. Every question about time eventually collides with memory, for memory is how we feel the arrow most clearly, and without memory we could not say whether time flows at all, nor whether past or future exist, for all would dissolve into sameness. The mind records experience by changing physically, neurons strengthening and weakening connections, molecules shifting to hold a trace, and these changes are irreversible because they are small rises in entropy themselves, leaving marks we cannot erase. So the evidence of time is etched into us with every heartbeat, with every thought, with every step forward. And it is this evidence that makes the arrow unarguable, undeniable, stitched into identity. Without such marks, life would be a blur, a collection of moments disconnected, no history, no learning, no self to bind them together, a hollow existence. Imagine, then, what it would mean if memory ran backward, if we remembered tomorrow instead of yesterday, if the arrow turned within our minds, reshaping continuity into confusion, undoing every trace as it was laid. The experience would collapse instantly because we would never know cause from effect, never know why we acted, never know what choices meant, our lives unraveling into incoherence, identities without anchors. Even language would fail, for verbs assume direction, stories assume sequence, and culture assumes time. So a reversed memory would dismantle the very structure of communication, leaving silence where narrative once stood. So to live in backward time would not be to live at all, but to dissolve, for existence requires forwardness to mean anything, and without it, the word life would lose all shape. Still, there are subtler ways to ask the question, not of minds, but of matter, and we turn to quantum mechanics, where reversibility appears more plausible, where the equations seem neutral, and the arrow grows faint. At the level of individual particles, reversibility is indeed allowed, for the mathematics works equally in both directions, and nothing in the rules forbids backward paths, nothing insists on one over the other, symmetry reigns. But the moment we scale upward into billions of interactions, probability overwhelms neutrality, and entropy tilts the outcome, and what was possible in isolation becomes drowned in disorder, erased by scale. Thus, the tension between micro and macro endures, the rules beneath saying one thing, the cosmos above insisting on another. And in that tension, the arrow emerges, fragile in origin, absolute in result. Perhaps this is why time fascinates us, because it feels both inevitable and mysterious. Inevitable in experience, mysterious in theory, always tugging between clarity and doubt. We know from daily life that cups break but do not unbreak, that smoke disperses but does not reassemble, and yet our best equations shrug, unconcerned with direction, indifferent to what feels undeniable, and this contradiction unsettles us. The beauty of physics is that it allows both visions, forward and backward, but the weight of probability decides which one becomes reality. A decision not of law, but of likelihood. Not of certainty, but of chance. And so the answer to our puzzle begins to sharpen, for time could run backward, but the dice are cast so heavily forward that reversal is hidden behind impossibility's veil, never rolling in our favor. Consider again the story of the cosmos, for entropy is not only about broken cups or melted ice, but about galaxies, stars, and black holes, each one a monument to time's arrow, each one locked in forward flow. Every supernova is irreversible, a detonation that spreads heavy elements into space, a single event that cannot rewind, cannot gather fragments back into fuel, for the explosion is entropy at its loudest. Even the ashes of stars prove this, scattered into interstellar clouds where new systems form. But the old stars themselves never reappear, never undo their deaths, never retrace their collapse. So the galaxies we admire are shaped by one-way events, each collision, each merger, each burst of light, the arrow written into their architecture, into their very glow, evidence against reversal. Still deeper lies the paradox of black holes, where entropy reaches its highest form, for their horizons are storehouses of information, and each particle swallowed increases their entropy, never decreases it. A black hole cannot undo its feast, cannot spit matter back as if it never fell. For the horizon is a one-way surface, a record of irreversible capture, a monument to forwardness. The mystery of information loss remains unsolved, yet even the most daring theories of physics accept that reversal is impossible here, that once matter crosses the horizon, its fate is sealed, the arrow becomes final, and through Hawking radiation, black holes evaporate, their mass leaking into faint particles, entropy spilling outward, proof again that the arrow rules even the darkest corners, never retreating. Now, let us push further into philosophy, for if the arrow defines memory, meaning, and mortality, then to imagine reversal is to imagine a world without value, without identity, without continuity. The stories we tell depend on beginnings leading to middles, and middles leading to ends. And if reversal ruled, endings would arrive first, dissolving into origins we forget, collapsing every narrative. Even art itself, a record of expression in time, would lose coherence, for music would dissolve into silence before notes, paintings would unmake into blank canvas, words would erase into white page, undoing all creation. So the arrow is not just scientific but cultural, binding us to direction, making art and memory possible. And a reversed world would be unlivable, not only physically, but imaginatively, a place where nothing could mean. Still, some physicists hold out hope that small reversals may be glimpsed, not globally, but locally. Rare fluctuations where disorder shrinks for a moment, where probability bends, where the arrow stutters. The theory of statistical mechanics predicts such fluctuations, though they are so improbable they might never occur on scales we can see. Yet across infinite time they are inevitable, bound to happen somewhere, someday. To witness such a fluctuation would be astonishing, like watching smoke gather itself, like seeing heat flow into a flame instead of out. A miracle of probability defying expectation. A glimpse of reversal. But these events would be brief, unstable, and rare. Too fragile to sustain life, too small to alter history. Curiosities of chance rather than rules of reality. Perhaps, then the true answer is not whether time can run backward, but why it almost never does. And why our universe is tilted so strongly toward the forward. Why probability is stacked this way. The beginning of the universe remains the key, for it was born in improbable order, a state so neat it allowed entropy to climb, and that climb has written the arrow ever since, shaping every event. So the truth may be that we live in a cosmos that is statistically biased, a cosmos where forward is favoured not by law but by birth, not by rule but by accident, not by symmetry but by history. And in that history lies our answer. Time could run backward, but it does not, because we inhabit the branch where forward was chosen at the start, and everything else follows. Still, even in knowing this, we cannot help but wonder what it would mean to rebel, to fight the arrow, to imagine immortality, youth without age, life without entropy, a defiance of the universe's tide. In myth, we see this longing everywhere, from tales of eternal youth to dreams of resurrection. Each one a story of time's reversal, a refusal to accept forwardness as final, a human cry against entropy. But the science beneath shows us the harsh truth, that reversal is not given, that the arrow is law in practice, and so myth becomes our only refuge. Imagination, our only reversal. Story, our only escape. Yet the beauty is that these dreams matter, for they reveal our yearning. They show how deeply the arrow shapes us, and they turn longing into art, resistance into creativity, defiance into meaning. Now, the path of our search begins to circle closer to its core, for we see that backward time is possible in equations but forbidden in practice, possible in principle but impossible in life, allowed yet denied. The final answer may therefore be this: time does not run backward because the odds do not allow it, because entropy grows relentlessly, because probability writes our fate in forward ink, permanent and irreversible. And yet the question remains worth asking, for in asking we uncover not only physics but philosophy, not only science but meaning, and we discover that forward time is the condition of value, the reason life can matter, the reason existence has story. So the arrow is both cage and gift, both prison and possibility, forbidding reversal but allowing growth, forbidding return but allowing meaning, closing some doors while opening others. Every attempt to understand time brings us back to entropy, for entropy is not just a law of physics, but a lens that shapes how we see the world. And without it, direction would vanish, order would collapse, leaving us in timelessness. The arrow of time is not commanded by equations but by probabilities, which leans so heavily toward disorder that forward becomes inevitable. And yet we must remind ourselves that inevitability here is only overwhelming odds, not fundamental ban, chance masquerading as certainty. We walk through our days trusting the arrow, knowing that breakfast will not uneat itself, that conversations will not dissolve into silence before they begin. And this trust builds our lives, our culture, our stories, each one a thread woven only forward. So the truth we must hold is simple but profound. Time could run backward, but in practice it does not, because probability hides backwardness behind numbers so small they vanish from reality, leaving us only with forward. Consider the human body as a living testament to the arrow, for every cell, every organ, every system relies on energy moving from high states to low, and without that flow, life would stall, metabolism would freeze, and biology would die. The cells burn fuel, extracting order from food and spilling disorder outward into heat, and in that trade, the arrow is written into flesh, in every heartbeat, every breath, every flicker of thought, binding us to forwardness. If time reversed, these processes would not simply rewind in a way we could survive. They would collapse into incoherence, with food undigested, oxygen unbreathed, and identity unformed, unraveling existence instead of sustaining it. Thus, the arrow is not merely external, not only cosmic, but intimate, inscribed in blood, in memory, in heartbeat, our very existence chained to its forward climb. Imagine what it would mean if biology itself ran backward, if organisms unraveled into eggs, if forests dissolved into seeds, if fossils rose from stone and grew flesh again, if history was a film in rewind. The experience of such a life would be alien, for memory could not anchor us, language could not describe cause, and culture could not persist, because every forward expectation would fail, every meaning would dissolve, every pattern would break. We see hints of this strangeness when we dream, when sequences shuffle and endings arrive before beginnings. But even dreams remain anchored in the arrow because the brain itself cannot truly imagine reversal, only distortions of forward flow. So to live in such a reversed cosmos would not be to live at all, but to fragment. For without cause leading to effect, without memory pointing backward, identity would collapse, leaving emptiness. Still, there are realms of physics where reversibility feels less impossible, where the rules themselves allow backward paths. And here we must descend to the quantum, the smallest stage, where symmetry still holds, unbroken. The particles of quantum mechanics obey laws that do not distinguish between forward and backward, equations that permit motion in either direction equally. And so at this scale, time is neutral, reversible, unconcerned with entropy. But scale is everything, for when billions of such particles interact, the odds favor disorder so overwhelmingly that forward emerges, and what was symmetrical in small numbers becomes biased in large, burying reversal under probability. This paradox between micro and macro defines the arrow, symmetry below and direction above. Possibility in principle and impossibility in practice, a universe layered with contradiction. Perhaps this contradiction explains why time captivates us, because it feels both obvious and mysterious. Obvious in daily life, mysterious in theory, both undeniable and yet unresolved. The laws insist that backward is allowed, that nothing prevents it mathematically, but the cosmos insists that forward is reality, that entropy rules, that memory flows, and this split unsettles us. We know from broken cups and fading stars that time is irreversible, and yet we know from equations that reversal is possible, and holding both truths at once stretches our understanding, leaving us restless. So the question lingers, if time could run backward, why doesn't it? And the answer begins not with law, but with history, with the improbable beginning of the cosmos, with the roll of dice that set the arrow. Consider the birth of the universe, that moment we call the Big Bang, when matter and energy erupted into being, when entropy was improbably low, when smoothness reigned, and from that smoothness, the arrow was born. The universe began in a state so neat it defies probability, so unlikely it remains unexplained. And yet it is this beginning that gave entropy room to grow, that gave time room to flow, that gave us history. If the origin had been messy, filled with irregularities and chaos, then the arrow would have been smothered at birth, for entropy would already be maximized, and no direction could unfold, no stars could shine. So the mystery of time's arrow is also the mystery of the beginning, why the cosmos was so improbable, why order was chosen over chaos, why the story could begin at all. Even cosmologists admit they do not know, for no observation can pierce the veil of that first moment, and speculation multiplies, each theory elegant but unconfirmed, each one a guess dressed in mathematics. Some scientists suggest the Big Bang was a fluctuation, a chance accident in an infinite sea where improbabilities eventually occur, and we inhabit the branch where order began, where entropy could grow, where time could flow. Others imagine the multiverse, with countless universes, each with its own arrow, some forward, some backward. And we simply live in the one where the arrow points as it does, because only here life could arise. But the truth is that none of these speculations are proven, and the origin of the arrow remains unsolved, a riddle that underlies all physics, a mystery we still chase, an unanswered question at the root of being. Still, we can step back to our own cosmos and see how the arrow has shaped everything since. How stars, galaxies, and black holes tell its story, how entropy writes their fates, how time leaves scars. A supernova is irreversible, scattering matter in explosions so vast they forge new elements, and no symmetry can reverse such an event, no probability can gather every atom back, for disorder has already claimed them. The ashes of those stars, the elements in our bodies, are living proof of irreversibility. Each atom forged in forward burning, each molecule assembled in history that cannot be undone, each breath proof of time's direction. So when we breathe the arrow. When we think with entropy. When we live within forwardness. And all of existence is written in one direction, carved by probability. Perhaps this is why myths and dreams of reversal run so deep in us, because we long to undo loss, to retrieve what entropy has stolen, to reverse endings, to soften mortality with imagination. In stories, we play with backward time, from prophets who glimpse tomorrow to films that unwind events. And in these tales, we resist the arrow, if only in thought, if only in art. But the truth is that no myth can change physics, no dream can undo entropy, no wish can alter probability, and though imagination is free, reality holds firm, and the arrow does not bend. Still, the value of these dreams is real, for they reveal our yearning, they show how deeply direction shapes us, and they remind us that without finality, there would be no meaning, no weight to love or loss. Now, the puzzle grows sharper, for we see that time could in principle reverse, yet in practice it never does. And this tension is the heart of the question, the reason we ask it at all, the paradox we cannot ignore. The equations are symmetrical, but probability is not. And it is this tilt that creates reality. This tilt that gives us history, this tilt that makes the arrow absolute, in practice, if not in law. So the answer we glimpse is layered. Time is neutral at its core, directional in its outcome, reversible in equations, irreversible in reality, possible in principle, impossible in life. And the reason for that impossibility lies in the beginning, in the improbable order that tilted probability forward, and in the overwhelming odds that keep it there forever, denying reversal. Still, we must ask what this means for meaning itself, for if time is bound forward, then our lives are bound forward, and every moment we cherish is made valuable by its irreversibility. The memory of love or learning would mean nothing if it could be undone, if it could be replayed endlessly. But because it cannot, because entropy forbids return, it becomes priceless, weight carved into time. If the arrow bent freely, existence would lose gravity, for choices could be erased, consequences rewritten, and meaning itself would dissolve, for nothing would be final, nothing would matter, nothing would endure. So the truth is paradoxical. The arrow that limits us also frees us. The arrow that dooms us also gives us meaning. The arrow that denies return also creates value, a cage that is also a gift. Even as we reach toward the answer, the question still burns. For why was the beginning ordered? Why was probability tilted? Why was history allowed? And here we confront the limits of science. The cosmos itself may hold the answer beyond our reach, hidden in the first instant, beyond telescopes, beyond mathematics, a truth locked away where we cannot see, where we cannot test, where mystery remains. Perhaps the universe does not owe us clarity. Perhaps it simply is, and its improbability is the reason we exist, and the arrow is the price we pay for life, for story, for the chance to wonder. So we accept the arrow even as we question it. We accept entropy even as we resist it. For in forwardness we find meaning, and in meaning we find peace, even if the mystery remains unsolved. Every moment we have traced so far has shown entropy as the sculptor of the arrow, but now we must look deeper into the stage where entropy plays, for the fabric of space-time itself carries the story, bending under gravity, stretching under expansion, shaping how time flows. The theory of relativity revealed that time is not an absolute river flowing identically everywhere, but a dimension woven with space, And that motion, gravity, and energy bend it, slow it, stretch it, turning flow into geometry. We learned that near massive objects, time ticks slower, and that for fast-moving travelers, time lengthens. And these effects are real, measurable, undeniable, bending our very sense of sequence. So the arrow of time is not only about entropy's climb, but about the shape of space-time. For relativity tells us that time is woven, curved, and relative, not flat and universal. Consider then what reversal would mean in such a fabric. For if time bent backward locally while space held forward, contradictions would erupt, and the geometry itself would break, twisting cause into paradox, unraveling the stage of physics. The laws of relativity allow us to imagine closed, time-like curves, loops where one could return to a past moment. But such loops create contradictions so profound that nature seems to resist them, forbidding their reality. If we travelled a closed curve, we could meet ourselves, speak before speaking, arrive before departing. And though equations allow the geometry, probability and causality forbid the paradox, smothering reversal under logic. Thus, the universe seems to guard the arrow not only with entropy, but with consistency, for without forwardness, events would devour themselves, meaning would collapse, and cause could not exist. Still, black holes tempt us again, for inside their horizons, relativity bends space-time into extremes, and near these extremes the arrow appears unstable, direction blurred, forwardness shaken by gravity's grip. The horizon marks a place where inside and outside lose their usual meaning, where even light cannot escape, and beyond it the future appears to point only inward towards singularity, a direction that is absolute. Yet the arrow there still marches forward, entropy still rises, and the singularity is not a beginning but an end, not a return but a culmination, not reversal but collapse. To reverse such collapse would be to defy both relativity and entropy, to turn singularity into rebirth. And though some theories dream of bounces or cycles, none erase the arrow, none make it run backward. Perhaps the greatest test of the arrow is cosmic expansion itself, the growth of the universe since the Big Bang. For the stretching of space is irreversible, written into the motion of galaxies, impossible to undo. The cosmos is expanding faster than ever, driven by dark energy, spreading galaxies apart at accelerating rates, and this expansion sets the stage for entropy's final act, for equilibrium across infinite distance, for heat death. If time reversed, space would contract instead of expand, galaxies would rush inward instead of apart, stars would brighten back into fuel, black holes would uncollapse, and entropy would decrease. But such a vision is not our universe's path, for every measurement confirms acceleration, every observation confirms expansion, every sign confirms the arrow's forwardness. Still, cosmology teases us with cyclic models, universes that bounce instead of ending, arrows that reset instead of dying, and these cycles tempt us with the dream of renewal, of time reborn, of meaning extended. In some models, the universe collapses back into a big crunch, a mirror of the Big Bang, where perhaps a new arrow could emerge, perhaps reversed, perhaps reborn, perhaps continued in symmetry. Other ideas suggest universes bubble endlessly, each one beginning with a low entropy state, each one unfolding its own arrow. And so backward time might exist elsewhere, but not here, not now, never for us. So the answer again sharpens. Backward time is possible in mathematics, but forward time is the story we inhabit. And only by forwardness can complexity, life, and meaning arise. Now, let us dive into the philosophy beneath, for time is not only a physical dimension but an experiential weight. And we must ask why we feel its arrow so strongly when equations care so little, when symmetry reigns below. The consciousness we carry depends on memory, and memory depends on irreversible traces in the brain. And so, awareness itself is bound to entropy, chained to disorder's rise, built upon forwardness. If time reversed, awareness would collapse because memory would erase itself, identity would vanish, and a conscious being could not survive reversal, for the very conditions of thought would break, leaving silence. So the truth is that the arrow is not only physical but psychological, not only cosmic but human, a dual law that binds stars and minds alike, binding meaning to physics inseparably. Consider the role of probability once more, for it is probability that hides reversal, that tilts the dice toward forward, and the mathematics of large numbers that makes impossibility out of possibility, finality out of chance. A deck of cards can shuffle back to order in principle, but in practice the odds are astronomical, and so time could reverse in principle, but in practice it does not, and the arrow emerges. This logic means that what feels like law is only likelihood, and yet likelihood is enough to govern the cosmos, enough to build galaxies and people, enough to turn possibility into permanence. So the arrow is not a decree, but a weight of chance, and this weight is heavier than mountains, heavier than stars, so heavy it crushes backwardness into absence, leaving only forward in sight. Even the paradoxes of time travel show us this truth, for though equations allow closed loops, probability and consistency forbid them, and the contradictions they breed are warnings, not invitations, barriers instead of doors. The grandfather paradox asks what happens if you change the past, and every answer collapses into absurdity. For either you undo your own existence or create impossible loops, and nature resists such incoherence. In response, some theories invent parallel timelines, where reversal splits into branches instead of contradictions. But even then, entropy holds, for each branch has its own arrow, each arrow runs forward, none truly reverse. So, the dream of time travel remains fiction, and the arrow remains fixed, and the contradictions remain unsolvable, and forwardness remains our only road, our only story. Perhaps, then the deeper answer is that the arrow is woven into every level of existence, from the smallest collisions to the fate of the cosmos, from neurons to galaxies, from memory to expansion. A law that emerges everywhere. The meaning of this is profound, for it means that forwardness is not an illusion, but a condition, not a trick, but a truth, and that our longing for reversal is not physics, but yearning, not law, but imagination. If time could run backward, it would not grant us healing or youth or resurrection. It would dismantle identity, erase coherence, collapse meaning, and no life could persist. So the gift of the arrow is paradoxical. It denies us return, but gives us narrative. It denies us reversal, but gives us significance. It denies us control, but gives us value. Still questions linger about what lies beyond, whether entropy's climb is eternal, whether the arrow's rule is final, or whether deeper truths remain hidden, truths we cannot yet see, truths that could reshape our understanding. Some physicists suspect that at the quantum gravity level, near the Planck scale, time may not exist at all, but may emerge as an approximation. And if so, the arrow is not fundamental, but emergent, fragile, born from deeper laws. In that vision, time is a construct, a shadow cast by more fundamental processes, and the arrow is only a reflection of probabilities in a larger framework, a temporary feature, not an eternal law, a surface, not a core. If this idea is true, then backward time is not impossible but irrelevant, for time itself may not be basic, and what we call forward and backward may dissolve into something deeper, unnamed, beyond our language. Now, we can sense the layers converging, physics and philosophy intertwining, probability and meaning aligning, and the arrow of time stands revealed as more than mechanics, more than entropy, more than chance. The cosmos flows forward not because it must, but because it began ordered and had room to climb. And this climb wrote direction into existence, carved it into stars and people, into galaxies and thought. We live within this climb, and though we dream of reversal, though we imagine backwardness, though we long for second chances, the arrow holds firm, guiding us one way only, binding us to its story. So the answer grows clearer. Time could in principle run backward, but in practice it does not. And in that refusal lies both our limitation and our meaning, our fragility and our value. Every discussion of time eventually collides with information, for information is the record of events, the footprint of entropy. And without records, there would be no past, no story, no memory, only an eternal blur. The truth is that entropy and information are two sides of the same coin, each rise in disorder creating traces, each trace marking direction. And in those traces we see forwardness written, unavoidable and permanent, stitched into the fabric of existence. We know that when a cup shatters, the fragments hold more information than the whole, more arrangement, more complexity, but none of it can reform into the simple unity again because the probability tilts against it. The arrow chooses one side. So the laws of thermodynamics are not just about heat or matter, but about information itself. And the forward arrow is as much about knowledge as it is about energy, as much about record as it is about motion. Consider the strange paradox of forgetting. For memory in the brain depends on irreversible marks, but forgetting does not truly erase. It only adds more complexity, more traces on top, never undoing the arrow beneath. The neurons alter their wiring to strengthen or weaken a thought, but the act itself is irreversible, adding entropy as it occurs. And even erasure is only new writing, not true deletion, another trace instead of less. So in practice, there is no backward for memory, no real undo, no true return. And even in the most intimate part of self, time holds absolute sway. The arrow is final. Thus, the mind becomes the clearest mirror of entropy, shaped by forwardness, chained by irreversibility. And even imagination of reversal is only forward rearrangement of traces, never true undoing, never true backwardness. Still, quantum mechanics teases us with possibilities, with rules that seem neutral, reversible, symmetric. And yet when we observe, when we measure, the arrow returns, collapsing probabilities into facts, and leaving irreversible records behind. The measurement problem of quantum theory asks why outcomes appear definite when equations allow superpositions. And one answer is that observation itself is entropic, creating irreversible traces in the measuring device, binding quantum neutrality to macroscopic arrow. In this way, the arrow may emerge not just from probability, but from observation itself, from the act of measuring, from the collapse of possibilities into one outcome, from the creation of records. So the truth may be that time's arrow and quantum measurement are inseparable, each requiring the other, each shaping the other. And without observation, there is no direction, no story, only probabilities drifting. Perhaps this is why entropy and information are so deeply tied, why black holes themselves hold entropy in proportion to surface area. Because every particle swallowed adds information to the horizon, never subtracts it, records that cannot be undone. The horizon of a black hole becomes the universe's strangest notebook, a surface where information hides, never destroyed, never erased. And this makes black holes not only gravitational monsters, but informational prisons, irreversible to their core. The paradox of information loss once haunted physics, asking whether data could vanish forever inside. But the modern consensus is that it is not lost, only scrambled, distorted, hidden, preserved irreversibly in entropy. So the arrow rules here as well, for information flows one way, into record, into disorder, and backwardness is forbidden even at the edge of singularity, even at the most extreme stage of reality, beyond any hope of reversal. Now, imagine what reversal would mean for information itself, for every record would have to unwrite, every trace would have to vanish, books would unprint, memories would erase, fossils would dissolve, and the very archive of the universe would collapse. The concept of history would disappear, because history is nothing but records, nothing but traces of entropy rising. And in a reversed cosmos, there could be no history at all, no story to tell, only unwriting. We depend on records so deeply that we forget they are entropy's children, that they exist only because events leave irreversible imprints, and to imagine them erased is to imagine the collapse of continuity, the collapse of self, the collapse of existence. So, the question of time running backward is really the question of whether records can be unwritten, and the answer is no. For probability denies it, for entropy forbids it, for the arrow protects its traces. Even mathematics shows us this in the logic of thermodynamics, where the second law says entropy increases, and every rise leaves information behind, every change leaves more records, never fewer. The formulas themselves are neutral, allowing for reversals in principle, but the second law emerges when probabilities are tallied, when all the possible microstates are counted, and the arrow appears. Thus, in theory, time could be reversed, but in practice, the overwhelming likelihood makes it impossible. And in practice, impossibility is enough. Impossibility is reality. Impossibility is law. So the arrow becomes not only a physical rule, but a probabilistic necessity. Not only heat, but information, not only energy, but records. A truth that expands into every corner of the cosmos. Still deeper lies the question of whether time itself is fundamental, or whether it too is emergent, a construct born of deeper laws. And here physics ventures into mystery, into theories we cannot yet test, into speculation. Some scientists argue that time is not basic, but emergent from entanglement, that space and time themselves arise from quantum information, that the arrow is an echo of deeper connections, not a primal law, not eternal. In this vision, the universe at its deepest level does not have time, only relationships, only patterns, only probabilities. And what we call forward and backward are shadows cast by these structures, illusions of emergence. So the truth may be stranger than we dream, that time could run backward only in the sense that emergence could change, that the surface rules could alter if deeper rules shifted. But for us, forward remains absolute. Perhaps this explains why humans feel time so differently from physics, why we speak of past and future, why we feel loss and hope, because what we live is emergent, not fundamental, a construct of entropy and information, not of pure law. The consciousness we carry is a product of records, and records are products of entropy, and entropy is the mark of forward. And so awareness itself is not neutral, but directional, not free, but bound, shaped by the arrow. We long for reversal because we long for release from entropy, but release would not bring us comfort. It would dissolve us, erase us. For we are creatures of records, creatures of memory, creatures of forwardness, children of entropy. So the meaning we seek is not beyond the arrow, but within it, not in reversal, but in acceptance, not in breaking it, but in living with it, not in dreaming of backward, but in cherishing forward. Even in philosophy, the arrow dominates, for cause and effect define reason itself, and without cause, without sequence, thought unravels, logic breaks, coherence collapses. The principle of causality assumes forwardness, assumes that causes precede effects, that evidence follows events. And if time reversed, reason itself would dissolve, arguments would collapse, nothing could persuade or explain. So, in truth, the arrow is not only a condition of physics, but a condition of thought, a law that binds minds as tightly as it binds stars. For reason is forward, memory is forward, and meaning is forward. Thus, the question of backward time is also the question of whether thought can exist without direction. And the answer is no. For even the act of asking requires forwardness, requires cause, requires arrow, requires entropy. Now we begin to glimpse the deepest edges, where the arrow is no longer only a law of physics, but the stage of existence itself. A stage where everything plays out, from galaxies to thoughts, from stars to stories, from cosmos to mind. The universe flows forward because it began improbably ordered, because probability tilted, because entropy had room to climb. And that climb is irreversible, overwhelming, absolute, binding everything. We live inside that climb, built from its traces, carried by its currents, doomed by its weight, and yet gifted by its generosity. For without it, we would not exist. Without it, there would be no life. So the answer grows sharper still. Time could run backward, but in doing so it would erase existence, erase memory, erase meaning. And so forward is not only reality, but necessity, not only truth, but condition, not only law, but life. Every human life is a mirror of the arrow, beginning in birth, growing in change, and ending in death. And the inevitability of this sequence shapes not only biology, but meaning, for it is the forwardness of time that gives life weight, that makes each moment irreplaceable. The truth is that mortality is entropy made personal, the second law of thermodynamics written into flesh and memory. And though we resist it, though we dream of undoing it, death is the clearest mark of irreversibility, the most intimate proof of the arrow. We fear this irreversibility, yet it is also what allows meaning to exist, because without endings, beginnings would hold no power. And without finality, choices would dissolve into repetition, consequences into nothing, life into emptiness. So the arrow of time is both our greatest burden and our greatest gift, denying us eternity but granting us significance, forbidding reversal but allowing value, forbidding return but giving story. Imagine a world where mortality did not exist, where entropy reversed and bodies grew younger instead of older, where memories unwrote themselves, where scars healed by erasing the injury as if it never was, where death was undone before it arrived. The experience of such a life would not be paradise, for identity would collapse, continuity would break, memory would disassemble, and the self would dissolve into fragments that never endure, never accumulate, never become whole. We assume that immortality would give meaning, but it may instead erase it. For meaning depends on scarcity, on endings, on moments that vanish forever. And without vanishing, there is no reason to cherish, no reason to value, no reason to live. Thus the arrow of time, harsh as it feels, may be the very source of beauty, because only in moving forward can we love, only in losing can we care, only in ending can we find meaning, and reversal would take it away. Still, cultures across history have dreamed of defeating the arrow, from myths of eternal youth to religions promising resurrection, each one a cry against entropy, a wish to undo time, a hope to escape irreversibility. The legends of fountains that heal age, or gods that reverse death, or paradises where decay does not exist, all arise from our refusal to accept the arrow's tyranny, from our longing to rewind the irreversible, from our dream of backwardness. But in truth, these myths endure not because they are real, but because they are impossible, because they express our yearning for what physics denies, and in their impossibility they remind us of what we value most, of what is fragile. So the arrow becomes not only a physical fact, but a spiritual boundary, shaping myth as much as it shapes stars, defining longing as much as it defines galaxies, binding human hope to cosmic law. Consider how death itself is entropy's climax in life, the moment when order collapses, when the body can no longer resist disorder, when cells fail, when systems break, when energy stops flowing, and forwardness completes its work. The biological arrow mirrors the cosmic arrow, each life a small universe of order slowly undone, each organism a pocket of improbability collapsing into probability, each heartbeat a step toward equilibrium. To reverse death would not be to heal, but to erase, to undo the story, to remove the traces. And in undoing the traces, the life itself would vanish, the meaning would dissolve, and memory would collapse. So the truth is that we do not only die because of entropy, we also live because of it. For the same imbalance that makes endings possible also makes beginnings possible, and we cannot separate them. Perhaps this explains why immortality feels both tempting and hollow, for we sense that endlessness would strip value from time, that without scarcity moments would blur, and without endings choices would lose weight, and life would lose shape. The meaning of existence is inseparable from its brevity, inseparable from its irreversibility, inseparable from the arrow. For what we love because it cannot be kept, because it must be remembered, because it cannot return. If time reversed, love itself would unravel, for memory would unwrite the bonds, stories would unspool into silence, and affection would dissolve into nothing. And the very things we long to preserve would be erased by reversal, not restored. So the paradox is sharp. Our yearning for backwardness arises from our love, but backwardness would erase love. And forwardness, though it breaks us, is the only path that lets us feel love at all. Even science fiction, which often plays with time reversal, reveals this paradox when told carefully. For stories of undoing the arrow often end in incoherence, in paradox, in collapse, because meaning itself resists reversal. The paradoxes of time travel, like meeting your past self or preventing your own birth, are not only narrative puzzles, but philosophical warnings. They show that life cannot exist without forwardness, that cause and effect cannot untangle, that backwardness collapses reason. We learn from these tales not only the limits of physics, but the limits of coherence. For to undo time is to undo story, and to undo story is to undo mind. And the arrow is as much narrative as it is physical, as much about coherence as energy. So the dream of reversal remains myth, not science, because even in imagination it erases meaning. And the arrow, harsh though it is, protects both reason and purpose, binding us to coherence. Still, physics continues to probe the limits, asking whether time is fundamental or emergent, whether the arrow is eternal or temporary, whether entropy's rule is law or surface, and each new insight deepens the puzzle. Some cosmologists propose that in the farthest future, after heat death, time may dissolve entirely, for without change there is no direction, without direction there is no flow, and in stillness time loses meaning. Others suspect that time itself is an emergent property of entanglement, that space-time is not fundamental but built from information, and if so, the arrow is not law but consequence, not eternal but contextual, not absolute but emergent. So the mystery lingers. Is forwardness written into the foundation, or is it an accident of emergence? Is it necessary in all realities or only in ours? Is it universal or only local? Now, let us imagine timelessness itself, a universe where no arrow exists, where entropy has finished climbing, where equilibrium reigns, and in such a world nothing would move, nothing would change, nothing would live. The concept of timelessness may sound like eternity, but in truth it is emptiness, for without change there is no awareness, no memory, no story, and what we think of as eternity would feel like nothingness, silence without measure. So to seek timelessness is to seek not paradise but erasure, not immortality but dissolution. For without the arrow there is no continuity, no story, no self, no existence. Thus the truth emerges again. Forward time is not only the reason we live, it is the reason we exist. The reason there is something rather than nothing, the reason there are stories rather than silence. Perhaps, then our yearning for backwardness is not a flaw, but a mirror of our fragility, a reminder that what we love most is fleeting, that meaning itself arises because time flows, because endings arrive, because irreversibility holds. The beauty of existence is inseparable from the arrow, for every sunset is unique, every breath unrepeatable, every moment fragile. And though this fragility hurts, it also makes life luminous, giving weight to the temporary. If time reversed, fragility would vanish, but so would beauty, and what we longed to preserve would collapse into nothing, and we would not be saved, but erased, not healed, but undone, not blessed, but silenced. So the lesson is clear. Backwardness would destroy the very things we yearn for, and forwardness, though painful, gives us the gift of meaning, the gift of story, the gift of love, the gift of existence. Even now, as we stand in this middle age of the cosmos, we feel the arrow pressing on us, reminding us of mortality, of endings, of entropy. And though we resist it, though we dream against it, we live by it, and cannot exist without it. The galaxies continue to spread apart, the stars continue to burn, the black holes continue to evaporate, and all of it is written forward, all of it irreversible, all of it chained to the arrow, every process unfolding one way. We exist in this fragile window between improbable beginnings and inevitable endings, a window where entropy rises but complexity still blooms. And in this bloom, meaning flowers, memory accumulates, and stories are told. So the truth we glimpse is this: backward time is not our story, forward time is, and forwardness, though fragile, is the condition of life, and in it we find not only law but beauty, not only necessity but gift. Every time we have spoken of the arrow, we have treated time as a flowing river, but deeper questions remain. Is the river truly moving, or is the flow an illusion, a trick of perception, a story told by consciousness? The idea that time is not fundamental but emergent has haunted physics for decades, whispered in equations of relativity and quantum theory, and it suggests that forwardness and backwardness are not universal truths but perspectives, shadows of something deeper. We measure time by clocks, by motions of planets, by vibrations of atoms. But these are only changes, only comparisons, only sequences, and the thing we call time may be nothing more than the ordering of change. So the truth may be that there is no flow, only arrangements of states, each one complete, each one existing. And what we feel as passage is only the mind linking states together, giving continuity where there is only stillness. Consider the block universe model, where past, present, and future all exist at once, where time is laid out like a landscape, not flowing, not changing, but fixed eternally in four-dimensional space-time. In such a picture, the arrow of time is not motion but geometry, not flow but structure, and forwardness is only the direction in which entropy increases across the landscape, a slope built into the terrain. We walk through this block not because the universe moves, but because our consciousness does, stringing together slices of space-time into narrative. And in this narrative, we invent flow, we invent before and after, we invent time. So the arrow may not be fundamental at all, but a projection of our awareness, a way of reading a universe that is frozen, eternal, and complete, a way of turning geometry into story, stillness into flow. Still, we resist this vision because it robs us of freedom, of becoming, of change. And though equations permit it, the human heart demands a present, demands a moving now, demands a river. The block model denies the difference between past and future, yet we feel them as opposites, we live them as opposites. And the arrow is more than geometry, it is experience, it is awareness, it is meaning. We know that memory points backward, never forward, that knowledge records what has been, but never what will be. And this asymmetry makes the present feel alive, the future unknown, the past solid. So the question becomes not whether the block universe is true, but why consciousness lives inside it with an arrow, why the mind sees sequence where physics sees structure, why the now feels special. Perhaps the answer lies in entropy again, for entropy provides the conditions for memory, for record, for trace, and it is because of these traces that we see time as flowing forward, never backward, never neutral. The mind is bound to the arrow because it requires records to exist, because thought depends on irreversible marks, and so consciousness itself is directional, consciousness itself is entropic, consciousness itself is forward. If time reversed, consciousness would not survive, memory would not accumulate, identity would not cohere. And so awareness is proof of forwardness, evidence that the arrow is real, at least for us, if not for the universe. Thus, the truth may be that forwardness is not universal but experiential, not fundamental but emergent. And yet for beings like us, it is absolute, binding, unbreakable, indistinguishable from existence. Even relativity reminds us that time is relative, that simultaneity is not universal, that observers in different frames disagree on what is now. And yet all agree on the direction of entropy, all agree on the arrow, all agree on disorder. The laws of space-time bend clocks and stretch durations, but the second law bends nothing, for it applies in every frame, in every context. And this makes entropy the true anchor, the true universal now, the only shared time. We see this in the cosmic microwave background, the faint echo of the Big Bang that fills the sky, for it is a universal record, a trace of order dissolving into disorder, a sign of the arrow stretched across the cosmos. So the cosmos itself has a clock not of ticking hands, but of rising entropy, a clock that no relativity can change, a clock that points one way only, forward, a clock that defines history. Still, the possibility lingers that time is not real in itself, that it is an emergent property of relationships, of change, of difference. And this possibility unsettles because it strips away the most familiar thing we know, leaving us with only patterns. The idea of timelessness is not comforting, for it means that past and future are illusions, that flow is invention, that the arrow is appearance, and what we feel as becoming is only arrangement, only geometry, only stillness. We fear this because it denies agency, denies choice, denies becoming, and though physics may support it, human meaning resists it. For without time there is no story, no love, no grief, no value. So the paradox remains. Physics points toward timelessness, but consciousness demands time. And the arrow may exist only because we do, only because minds like ours require it, only because we feel it. Consider, then, whether forward and backward are human constructs, ways of ordering experience rather than fundamental truths. And if so, our longing for reversal is longing for something we invented, something that exists only in us, not in the cosmos. The labels of past and future are ours, words we place on the geometry of space-time. And though the slope of entropy gives them grounding, the experience of flow belongs to us, not to the universe. And without us, there is no arrow. We long for reversal because we long for what we call past. We long for what we call memory. We long for what we call lost. But these categories exist only in forward time, not in timeless reality, not in fundamental physics. So the answer may be that backward time cannot exist because time itself may not exist, because it is invention, emergence, appearance, and what we call forward and backward are only shadows, only stories. Even then, the arrow retains its hold, for shadows shape us as surely as substance, and illusions can be lived as realities. And whether time is fundamental or not, its direction governs us, defines us, controls us. The universe may be timeless, but we are not. We are beings of memory, of record, of entropy. And so for us, the arrow is as real as matter, as real as stars, as real as love, undeniable. We cannot escape this, for to imagine escape is to imagine from within forwardness, to think with memory, to long with records. And so even our rebellion against the arrow confirms it, even our resistance proves it, even our dreams obey it. So the truth is that backward time will never be ours, for we are creatures of forward, creatures of entropy, creatures of arrow, and this is our story, our prison, our gift. Every discussion of time eventually touches on freedom, for if the arrow is fixed and irreversible, what room is left for choice? And if probability guides the universe forward without pause, how can we say we are free? How can we say we decide? The truth is tangled here, for physics describes laws and probabilities, but human life is lived in stories and decisions. And somewhere between these layers lies the paradox of free will, the puzzle of agency, the tension between arrow and choice. We know that entropy grows no matter what we do, that the second law is not optional, that the arrow moves forward regardless, and yet we also know that within that forwardness we act, we choose, we shape paths, we live as agents. So the question becomes not whether the arrow denies us freedom, but whether freedom exists inside the arrow, whether choice is real or illusion, whether meaning can endure in a universe tilted by probability, whether we are authors or passengers. Consider the block universe once more, where past, present, and future all exist at once, where time is not flow but landscape, And in such a geometry, every event, every decision, every consequence is already written, fixed and eternal. The block denies freedom, for if the future already exists alongside the past, then choice is only discovery, not creation, only revelation of what is already there, not invention of something new, only walking a path already built. We resist this vision because it makes us actors in a script we cannot change, because it robs us of agency, because it strips away responsibility, and though it may be elegant physics, it feels unbearable as philosophy, unbearable as life. So the debate rages: is free will illusion, or is it real within the arrow, and can meaning survive if it is only appearance? Or must we invent freedom to preserve purpose? Must we believe even if physics denies? Still, there is another view, that even if time is a block, freedom exists as perspective, for we do not see the block at once but live it sequentially, and in living sequentially, in facing choices without knowing outcomes, freedom is real in experience. The knowledge that the block may already contain the choice does not erase the feeling of choosing, does not dissolve the responsibility, and in this way freedom becomes emergent, not absolute, but no less meaningful, not fundamental, but experiential. We act without certainty, and it is this uncertainty that gives weight to decision, even if physics says the outcome is written. And in the space of not knowing, we carve meaning, we carve story, we carve self. So the truth may be that free will and the arrow coexist, not as opposites but as layers, with physics describing the structure and human experience describing the journey, and both being valid. Perhaps destiny and choice are not enemies but partners, for the arrow ensures that events unfold, while freedom ensures that meaning arises, and the two weave together into the tapestry of existence, inseparable and complete, both true in their domains. The arrow ensures that time does not stall, that the story continues, that causes lead to effects, while choice gives us a role inside the story, a sense of authorship, a sense of purpose, even if limited. In practice, this means that though we cannot reverse entropy, though we cannot stop the arrow, we can shape what happens within it. And this shaping is the ground of morality, of responsibility, of love, of being human. So, the gift of the arrow is not only meaning, but opportunity. The chance to act before endings arrive, the chance to shape stories before they close, the chance to matter within inevitability. Even inevitability itself carries paradox. For though death and entropy are certain, the paths leading there are not. And in those paths lies freedom. In those branches lies choice. In those details lies meaning. The future is not a single point, but a spread of possibilities, each consistent with entropy's rise, but not all identical. And within that spread we move, we decide, we change, and freedom emerges in the shape of probability. So we live in a universe where endings are fixed but journeys are not, where the arrow points one way but the road has branches, and our choices are which branch to walk, not whether the road flows, not whether entropy rises. Thus, the answer to freedom may not be escape from the arrow, but living inside it with awareness, with responsibility, with courage, shaping meaning within inevitability, shaping story within certainty, shaping love within loss. Still, the yearning for reversal persists, for if backward time were possible, mistakes could be undone, regrets erased, pain unmade, and this yearning is deeply human, deeply natural, but also deeply impossible. The reality is that backwardness would erase not only mistakes but lessons, not only pain but growth, not only loss but love. And in undoing suffering, it would undo meaning. In undoing endings, it would undo story. In undoing grief, it would undo joy. We long for reversal, but what we long for is not physics but healing, not backwardness but forgiveness, not entropy undone but wounds soothed. And these are things the arrow denies but meaning allows, things that live not in physics but in love. So the dream of backward time is really a dream of reconciliation, and though physics forbids it, meaning provides another way, another kind of reversal, not of time, but of spirit, not of entropy, but of understanding. Consider how freedom and the arrow shape morality, for morality itself assumes choice within direction, assumes that though time flows forward, though entropy rises, though endings are fixed, actions still matter, actions still count, actions still shape outcomes. The concept of responsibility requires both inevitability and freedom. Inevitability to ensure that actions have consequences, freedom to ensure that choices are ours, and without both morality collapses either into chaos or determinism, either into incoherence or fatalism. We act as though our choices ripple forward, as though they matter in the arrow, as though meaning is carved by what we do, and whether physics calls this illusion does not matter, for experience confirms it, for culture depends on it. So the arrow becomes the ground of ethics as much as of physics, and free will becomes the bridge between inevitability and meaning, between entropy and purpose, between law and love. Perhaps the greatest freedom we have is not to reverse the arrow, but to accept it, to live within it fully, to cherish the moments it gives, and to recognize that their brevity is their value, their irreversibility, their beauty, their fragility, their meaning. The lesson of time is not that we are powerless, but that power lies in presence, in action before endings, in love before loss. And though entropy denies return, it also grants the chance to live before silence, to act before stillness. So in truth, the arrow is both our boundary and our invitation, both our prison and our possibility, forbidding us from going back, but urging us forward, urging us to create, urging us to matter. Thus, the freedom we find is not absolute, but relative, not infinite, but enough. Enough to make meaning, enough to make purpose, enough to make life luminous even under entropy's weight. Even destiny itself changes meaning under this light, for if the arrow is fixed, destiny is not escape, but inevitability. And yet inevitability does not erase significance. It creates it by making each moment unique, by making each choice final. The arrow ensures that what is done cannot be undone, and this permanence is what makes choices weighty, what makes love lasting, what makes stories meaningful, and without it, everything would dissolve into repetition. We see this in memory, for memories are precious because they cannot be remade, because once gone, they are gone, because entropy has claimed them, and the arrow gives them beauty by giving them fragility. So the truth is that destiny is not the enemy of freedom, but its condition, not the denial of meaning, but its foundation. For without endings, choices would not matter. Without endings, lives would not shine. Still, physics invites us to push deeper, to imagine universes where time does not flow, where the arrow is absent, where everything exists at once, and in such universes freedom vanishes. For without direction there is no choice, no action, no story, only stillness. The block may be true in equations, but in life we are bound to the arrow, and it is here that freedom lives, here that love exists, here that meaning grows. And so the illusion, if it is illusion, is still reality for us. If time could run backward, freedom would collapse, meaning would dissolve, identity would vanish. And so even if reversal were possible, It would not save us, it would erase us, it would undo everything we are, it would undo existence itself. So the answer again sharpens. Forwardness is not just law, but necessity, not just probability, but condition. And within that condition lies both destiny and freedom, both inevitability and meaning, both arrow and life. Every star that burns is a clock of the arrow, each fusion reaction moving hydrogen to heavier elements, each burst of light spilling entropy outward into space, each moment pushing the universe toward disorder, and this process cannot be reversed. The galaxies we see glittering tonight are not eternal, but temporary, for their stars will one day exhaust their fuel, collapse, or explode, and every stage increases entropy. Every stage advances the arrow, every stage moves the cosmos forward. We live in the golden age of stars, an age when light fills the darkness, when galaxies still form, when black holes still swallow matter. But this will not last, for the arrow ensures that brightness fades, structures dissolve, silence grows. So the destiny of the universe is written in entropy's climb, not as punishment, but as consequence, not as cruelty, but as probability. And the arrow carries all matter and energy toward equilibrium, toward stillness. Consider the far future, trillions of years ahead, when the last stars fade into white dwarfs, then cool into black dwarfs, and the universe enters the age of darkness, an era where fusion no longer shines, where galaxies no longer glow, where entropy rules absolutely. The black holes will dominate then, swallowing remnants of stars, swallowing wandering matter, swallowing light itself, and each swallow increases entropy, each capture irreversible, each horizon a record of the arrow. We know even these will not last, for Hawking radiation slowly evaporates them, particle by particle, until their mass is gone. And though this takes longer than we can imagine, the arrow is patient, inevitable, absolute. So the cosmos itself ends not in reversal, but in silence, not in rebirth, but in stillness, not in backwardness, but in completion. The arrow reaching its summit, entropy maximized, equilibrium unbroken, forever. Still, the vision of heat death unsettles us, for it means that everything we know, life, light, story, will end. And though it is far beyond human time, the inevitability presses on imagination, forcing us to ask what meaning remains, forcing us to face the arrow's end. The truth is that heat death is not destruction, but emptiness, not chaos, but uniformity, not violence, but stillness. And this stillness is irreversible, for with no gradients there is no flow, no cause, no effect, no time. We realize here that the arrow depends on imbalance, on differences of energy, on gradients that allow processes to occur, and when those vanish, time itself vanishes, flow dissolves, and the universe becomes timeless. So the end of time is not reversal, but disappearance, not backward, but absence. And the arrow which has guided everything will finish its climb in silence, in uniformity, in stillness. Perhaps, then we must ask what meaning can survive such an ending. For if all stories close, if all lights fade, if all complexity dissolves, is existence itself empty, or does significance live elsewhere, beyond entropy? The minds that ask these questions are temporary, born of entropy, sustained by gradients, bound to forwardness. And when gradients vanish, minds vanish, questions vanish, and silence answers in their place. But meaning may not require eternity, for meaning is not in duration, but in experience, not in permanence, but in presence. And the arrow, by denying backwardness, by granting irreversibility, gives each moment its weight, each choice its value. So the truth is that the arrow's end does not erase the meaning that came before, for significance is carried in the living, in the fleeting, in the fragile, and though the universe forgets, we remember. Even in physics, traces remain after loss, for entropy itself is record, and information, though scrambled, is not destroyed. And though no being will read it, the cosmos carries memory in its silence, memory without witness. The horizon of black holes preserves data in entropy, the microwave background preserves the story of the Big Bang, the elements preserve the deaths of stars, and even when all is still, the traces will have been, the arrow will have written. We may not exist to interpret them, but the traces give testimony that order once lived, that complexity once thrived, that stories once unfolded. And this testimony is irreversible, permanent, eternal in its silence. So the cosmos may not need witnesses to hold meaning, for the arrow itself is witness, entropy itself is record. And the story of existence is written even when no one reads it, even when no one remembers, even when silence reigns. Still, we yearn for more, for survival beyond entropy, for meaning that endures past the arrow, for escape from heat, death. And though physics denies us, philosophy allows us to wonder, imagination allows us to hope, even in futility. The dream of cycles, universes reborn, arrows reset, time reversed, offers one vision, though evidence does not confirm it. And though it comforts, it remains speculation, not certainty, possibility, not proof. Others suggest the multiverse, countless bubbles, each with its own arrow, each with its own entropy, some forward, some backward. And though we cannot reach them, their existence would preserve balance, symmetry beyond our sight, arrows mirrored across infinity. But the truth is that these dreams do not save us, for our story belongs here, to this arrow, to this entropy, to this universe. And our meaning must be found within it, not beyond it, within forwardness, not outside. Now, the question grows sharper. If everything ends in silence, why does anything matter now? Why should life be cherished if it cannot last? And here the arrow itself answers, for irreversibility creates value, finality creates meaning, endings create significance. The beauty of a sunset is not less because it fades, but greater because it cannot return. And so too with life, so too with love, so too with existence, for the arrow makes every moment unique, unrepeatable, luminous. We see meaning not in eternity, but in brevity, not in permanence, but in fragility. And the arrow, though it denies us return, grants us this gift, the chance to live before silence, the chance to shine before dark, the chance to matter. So the lesson of entropy's end is not despair but urgency, not emptiness but fullness, not loss but weight. For in knowing that the arrow leads to silence, we learn to cherish its sound, to cherish its music, to cherish its story. Even if the universe forgets us, we do not forget ourselves, and our memories, our stories, our love are real while they exist. And reality is not diminished by brevity, meaning is not erased by finitude, significance is not undone by silence. The arrow teaches us this harsh truth, that permanence is not required for value, that eternity is not needed for love, that finality is not weakness but strength, and that the beauty of life is inseparable from its fragility. We know this instinctively, for the most precious things we hold are fleeting, childhood, seasons, moments, breaths, and they are precious not despite but because of their passing, because of the arrow that carries them away, because of entropy that denies return. So the truth shines clear. Backward time would not save us, backward time would erase us. For our beauty, our meaning, our significance exist only in forwardness, only in irreversibility, only in the arrow. Every path we have taken has circled back to the arrow, and now we must face the last question. Not only why time runs forward, but what it means that it does, what it means that existence itself depends on irreversibility, what it means that backwardness is denied. The truth is that time could run backward in principle, in mathematics, in symmetry, but backwardness would undo memory, undo life, undo meaning, and so though the equations allow it, existence itself does not. We know this now, for entropy has shown us its reach, from stars to minds, from galaxies to choices, and every rise in disorder has reminded us that the arrow is both prison and gift, both limit and condition, both law and meaning. So, the final question is not whether time could run backward, but why it matters that it does not. And in this question lies the deepest truth, the truth that forwardness is the very reason we exist, the very reason anything matters, the very reason there is story. Consider, again, the fragile origins of the cosmos, the improbable smoothness of the Big Bang, the low entropy that allowed the arrow to begin, and recognize that everything we know is the consequence of that improbability, the child of that chance, the unfolding of that history. The universe did not need to begin ordered. It did not need to allow entropy to rise. It did not need to give us gradients. And yet it did. And in doing so, it gave us stars, planets, and life. It gave us the arrow. So, in truth, the arrow is not simply a limit, but a miracle, a product of improbability so unlikely that it demands awe. For without it, nothing would exist, nothing would live, nothing would think, nothing would ask the question. Thus, the mystery of backward time is less about physics than gratitude. Gratitude that forward time exists at all, that improbability tilted in our favor, that chance gave us meaning, that history was possible. Even now, as we trace entropy's climb toward heat death, we must remember that the arrow has created everything of value, for without it there would be no stars, no chemistry, no biology, no memory, and nothing to cherish. The galaxies themselves are monuments to irreversibility, shaped by collisions that cannot be undone, by stars that cannot unburn, and their beauty is inseparable from their fragility, inseparable from their forwardness, inseparable from their entropy. We live within this fragility, and though we long for eternity, it is fragility that gives life weight. It is endings that give love urgency. It is irreversibility that makes choices count, that makes stories matter, that makes existence luminous. So the truth is that backward time would not save us, but erase us, and forward time, though it ends in silence, gives us the gift of meaning, the gift of story, the gift of life. Perhaps the deepest paradox is that physics does not forbid reversal, but experience does, consciousness does, existence does. And so the arrow is not only a physical truth, but an existential one, a truth that binds mind as tightly as matter, a truth that defines meaning. The mind requires traces, requires memory, requires irreversibility. And without these, awareness collapses, identity vanishes, story dissolves, and consciousness cannot exist. So, in truth, backward time would not only undo the universe, it would undo us. It would erase subjectivity. It would erase self. And what we long for would dissolve in the very act of achieving it, making salvation into destruction. Thus the arrow is not cruelty, but necessity, not denial, but possibility. And though it forbids us return, it grants us coherence, it grants us continuity, it grants us being, and without it, nothing. Still, we dream of more, of cycles that renew, of universes reborn, of arrows reset, and perhaps such dreams are not foolish. Perhaps symmetry preserves itself across infinities, perhaps balance is kept, but if so, we will never know. The multiverse may hold backward arrows in other branches, universes where entropy decreases, where life is impossible, but existence persists. And if they exist, they balance ours, they complete symmetry, they restore law, but they are forever beyond us. We inhabit this arrow, not another, and so our meaning must be found here, not there, in this forwardness, in this entropy, in this story. And to dream otherwise is to miss the gift we have, the rarity we were given, the miracle of our improbable arrow. So the answer is not escape, but acceptance, not reversal, but cherishing, not eternity, but presence. For within forwardness lies everything we love, everything we know, everything we are, and it is enough. Consider again the end of the cosmos, the heat death that awaits, the silence that will fall, and realize that this ending does not erase the beauty that came before. It sanctifies it, it gives it weight, it makes it precious. The arrow is the reason sunsets glow, the reason stars shine, the reason galaxies swirl. And though all of these will fade, their fading makes them luminous, their fragility makes them beautiful, their impermanence makes them matter. We fear the arrow because it carries us to endings, but without endings, there would be no beginnings. Without irreversibility, there would be no love. Without fragility, there would be no value. And so, even in fear, there is gratitude. Even in loss, there is meaning. Even in silence, there is music. So the truth is that backward time is not denied to punish us, but to bless us. For it is forwardness that makes life shine. It is irreversibility that makes love real. It is fragility that makes meaning possible. And it is enough. Even death, the most intimate form of the arrow, is not emptiness, but testimony. For it proves that life was lived, that order bloomed, that love was shared. And though death ends story, the story was written, the meaning was real. The arrow gave it weight. The memories we leave are fragile, fading, fragile again. But they are traces of entropy, records that cannot be unwritten, evidence that we existed, evidence that we mattered. And though time moves on, those traces remain. We may long for eternity, but eternity would strip meaning. Eternity would erase urgency. Eternity would dissolve value. And what we long for would be undone by its fulfillment. What we hope for would erase itself. What we dream of would collapse. So the lesson of backward time is not that we are denied paradise, but that paradise is not what we think. And the arrow, harsh as it feels, is the very thing that makes life luminous, fragile, and precious. Perhaps, then the arrow of time is the universe's greatest gift, greater than light, greater than matter, greater than space, for it is the condition that makes meaning possible, the condition that makes life possible, the condition that makes story possible, and without it, all would be nothing. The truth is simple but profound. Time could run backward, but it does not. And in that denial lies everything we cherish, everything we love, everything we are. And though it ends, it is enough. We exist not in eternity, but in forwardness, not in reversal, but in story, not in permanence, but in presence. And this is enough. This is luminous. This is beautiful. This is meaning. So the final paradox is solved. Time backward would erase us, time forward creates us. And the arrow, though it ends, is the reason there is something rather than nothing, the reason there is life rather than silence, the reason there is story. Even now, as we close this exploration, the arrow continues, carrying us forward, carrying us toward endings, carrying us toward silence. And though we resist it, though we dream against it, we live by it, we love by it, we exist by it. The cosmos itself is story, born in improbability, unfolding in entropy, ending in equilibrium. And though it will fade, the fact it existed at all is miracle. The fact it unfolded at all is meaning. The fact it was is enough. We know now that backward time is illusion, that forward time is reality, that irreversibility is condition. And though it denies us return, it gives us value, it gives us weight, it gives us significance, and that is more than enough. So the truth stands. The arrow is both boundary and gift, both silence and song, both prison and possibility. And in forwardness we find not only physics but philosophy, not only law but love, not only entropy but meaning. Perhaps this is the deepest answer of all, that the arrow is not to be fought but to be cherished, not to be undone but to be lived. For in its forwardness lies beauty, in its irreversibility lies value, in its fragility lies significance. And this is enough. The final word, then, is not despair but gratitude. Gratitude for the improbable beginning that gave us the arrow. Gratitude for the fragile present that allows us to live. Gratitude even for the silence that will come, for it gives weight to the story that came before. We exist within this arrow, and though it will end, though entropy will claim everything, it gave us life, it gave us meaning, it gave us love. And backward time would not have given these. Backward time would have erased them. Backward time would have left nothing. So the answer at last is clear. Time runs forward, not back. And in this forwardness lies miracle, lies beauty, lies significance. And it is enough.